For most of the 1930s, he waged a war of words because public opinion could stomach nothing stronger. For himself, he never doubted the threat posed by fascist dictators in Berlin, Rome, and Tokyo. With mounting frustration, he watched as Japan occupied Manchuria, Mussolini took Ethiopia, and Hitler annexed Austria before the spineless democracies handed him Czechoslovakia on a platter. Roosevelt didn't have to take a poll to know that most of his countrymen were both isolationist and anti-war. And why not? They remembered World War I. They remembered Wilson's promises of a war to end war, of a world made rational, of organized peacekeeping, and of 118,000 American lives seemingly thrown away. It's not difficult to understand why the American people were, quote, isolationist in the 1930s. It didn't mean they had forfeited their conscience. It didn't mean they were unaware of the crimes being perpetrated in Nazi Germany and elsewhere. It meant that they were in the thrall of their own memories, their own history, if you will. In 1935, their lawmakers passed the Neutrality Act, which prohibited the export of arms, ammunition, or implements of war to any belligerent nation. In 1937, they went further. They amended the act to forbid any American ship from entering a war zone or any American from traveling on belligerent vessels. That year, in 1937, there was, in fact, a national campaign to enact the Peace Amendment to the Constitution. There are polls, you go back and look, there are public opinion polls that show 70% of the American people wanted Congress to amend the Constitution so that before a war could begin, it was no longer enough for the president to ask for a declaration of war or for Congress to give him a declaration of war. After that, you then had to hold a national referendum. And a majority of the American people had to agree. That's the political climate in which FDR is operating. Anyway, what did he do? Well, he began behind the scenes to prepare the nation and its woefully inadequate military for what he knew lay ahead. The United States in 1940 had an army that was smaller than Portugal's. The defense budget was dramatically increased. The economy was gradually converted to a wartime footing. To broaden his political base, brilliantly, Roosevelt understood he needed to depoliticize any war effort. He brought in two leading Republicans, Henry Stimson, very distinguished former cabinet officer who became Secretary of War, Frank Knox, a Chicago newspaper publisher who'd run for vice president 4 years earlier to become Secretary of the Navy. He agreed to swap 50 old U.S. destroyers for British bases in the Caribbean and Newfoundland. And then at the end of December 1940, after he'd been reelected to a third term, before, in the last week of the campaign, he did something very foolish and very predictable. He succumbed to the fever of the polls, and he went to Boston and he made a famous speech in which he said, "Your sons are not going to be sent overseas to fight in foreign wars." Then he was reelected, and a month later, this is what he said to the nation in a fireside chat. This is not a fireside chat on war, he said. It is a talk on national security.